Since the beginning of time, man has always wanted to soar through the air. Only one obstacle stood in our way: the rats of the sky, birds. Those flying pests constantly block the best flight lanes, eat all the food in our squirrel feeders, and use our freshly washed carriages for bombing run practices. Their only saving grace is they taste good and can entertain us if necessary. So why do we put up with them? How can we bend them to our will? And what are the unique types found in our favorite setting? Welcome to Mystara. I'm Mr. Welch, and everybody knows that the bird is the word. Mystara doesn't stand out from the other settings in terms of magical flappy things. We don't have many birds exclusive to the world, but we aren't lacking in them either. We're pretty average in that respect. We've got a whole host of typical bird creatures, such as cockatrices, giant animals, and rocks. They might have gone a little heavy on the rocks. If a bird exists in the real world, you can place it in Mystara. Even the potu. That one bird that is 50% derp and 50% condescension. You know Mogul Khan has at least one in his menagerie. First up, looking at the bird specific to the setting. This video does not cover common monsters in the rule cyclopedia, as these entries are far more specific. You can find sturges wherever you need them, but it's a sturge. We know what they are, and the Mystaran sturge is no different from an Orthian sturge. They have the same rules and purpose, and are identical in every way. I've already covered the cockatrice in the hybrid animal video, and most giant animals are just regular birds, only supersized. Looking at you, giant magpie. The first bird is my one exception to the giant animal rule, the giant eagle, or in their language, the hyak. Yes, the giant eagles are at least partially sentient with a common tongue. They form their own settlements high in the mountains, coordinate hunting tactics between them, and have some degree of organization. They aren't on par with other intelligent creatures. They don't have poets or mathematicians, but if you encounter a group, you can at least talk to them. These are very much the giant eagles from Middle-earth. There's no attempt to disguise it. If you befriend one, it might give you a lift, but it can only carry 100 pounds at full speed, double that at half speed. The dwarf isn't catching a ride anytime soon. Gyerians are flightless bird humanoids that are more comic relief than actual monster. Though some taller versions exist, they resemble a cross between a 4-foot-tall chicken and Don Knotts. Gyerians are a secretive race, hiding from everyone else except elves, because the birdmen of Mystara are delicious. That's the only reason I can think of for their privacy. The elves probably spent years making friends with them to gain their trust. So when a Gyerian ends up the guest of honor at some elven banquet, they aren't the first suspects. The birdmen don't like to fight, but will peck you to death if you force the issue. Their most famous attack is their sneeze, which requires a saving throw to avoid being knocked down and taking some damage. These guys are definitely part of the silly phase. They build their nests/buildings where they can't be seen, like in tall grass, or in the woods where they secrete their buildings in tall bushes. Pretty sure that was supposed to say secret them. It's amazing what an extra E in a word can mean. Yay for 40-year-old typos. Piranha birds are ferocious predators found in warm climates, though they avoid large open areas. Direct sunlight repels them, but it doesn't hurt them. From personal experience, nobody calls them piranha birds. They will always be known as their assigned name, the piranhakeets. These little bastards like to fly around, sing pretty songs, show off their impressive plumage, and skeletonize hapless prey. They don't do much damage individually, but there's usually dozens of them. You can try to drive them off, but if they pass the morale check, that just pisses them off, and they get more bonuses to attack. And if you pissed off your DM, expect piranhakeets. There is a greater piranha bird variety, which is at least double in size, does not attack in packs, and does a healthy 2d6 points of damage per bite. While they're individually more dangerous, they don't cause the same levels of terror in player characters. Trust me on this one. Nothing against the greater piranhakeet, but when the players are aiming at one large flesh-tearing bird and it suddenly splits into dozens of much smaller flesh-eating birds, the players will rethink their tactics quickly, especially when they discover that these birds can hover like hummingbirds. They are one of the most underutilized monsters in the known world. Dungeons & Dragons has an obsession with the terror birds, with the creatures being represented across multiple monster manuals and every world having some version of them. Mystara's version is the Phorocacus, and I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right. A 6-foot-tall flightless murder bird that attacks in packs of up to 8. They do reasonable damage, have a fair amount of hit points, and serve as reasonable threats to parties. They will be found in Lost World settings, which of course means the Isle of Dread. Sprackles are an unholy combination of a grackle and a 9-volt battery. They were created by a wizard named Corrin, who first appeared in Wrath of the Immortals. The lesser versions appear as simple grackles with black or brown coloration. They can only be identified from their mundane cousins by the random sparks of electricity that randomly arc across their body. The larger version is almost 4 feet long and also sparks randomly. As you can guess, these guys' major trick is lightning. The birds toss lightning bolts like sailors throw out profanities. The electrical attacks don't do much damage, but there are typically a lot of sprackles and they breathe a lot of lightning. They're pests, but dangerous ones, especially if you're wearing metal armor. Moving on to the Savage Coast, we have a pair of birds, the first being the Greist. Again, no pronunciation guide given. These monstrosities are half pterodactyl and half condor, with lots of magical abilities built in. It's a large creature with a 10-foot wingspan, and it is most famous for never needing to land. It can stay aloft for its entire life, and many can do just that. The Greist can breathe fire once daily, but prefer to dive at their prey, skewering it with their long beaks. They can fight with those beaks, but obviously instead would like to attack from a dive, as it increases the damage inflicted. They travel in flocks of mostly family units, avoiding humanoid areas if possible. They do get along with the ER, even flying with them in rare situations. Other races hunt them for their feathers, as they make superior fletching for arrows. The Lyra bird of Saragon is probably the only creature on this list that isn't considered a threat to someone. It's rather beneficial, as their primary diet consists of parasites like the cardinal tick or inheritor leech. Those are nasty little buggers that jack with your Cinebril or your legacies. One of these little guys will fly in and eat 90% of the parasites on a creature before finding another beast with even more parasites. They're considered to be gifts from the immortals, and as such have permanent protection from evil 15-foot radius around them at all times. They can use different versions of the charm spell to convince predators to leave them alone or even protect them. They can't be caged, they will quickly die if captured. Intentionally killing one draws down a curse, usually a new affliction. Their song naturally draws creatures with large amounts of parasites, so they are never far from a beast that will defend it. Oddly enough, no XP is given if you kill one. Instead, you earn a reward for helping one. Those are the birds native to Mystara. It's just a handful, as I excluded the ones I've already covered. A few are serious threats, most are nuisances, and one is beneficial. But this leaves the video woefully short. I don't want to pad it by talking about the giant owl or giant hawk, because they're just regular birds with more hit dice and damage. But thinking back to my work on the setting, I remembered the one thing that every culture finds manly, especially appropriate on Father's Day. So I will talk about falconry in Mystara, as it is a relevant topic. Every nation in the known world practices falconry to some degree or another. Some, like Ethengar or Etrugan, use them primarily to hunt, rather than treating it as a sport. In nations like Darrican or Irendi, the reverse is true. The birds are used for show rather than to bring down game to feed people. In every case, the hobby is considered prestigious, whether the falconer is a noble or a peasant. It's a difficult practice to learn, as it shows the falconer has a degree of patience and talent that few possess, and also because chicks dig raptors. A fat, middle-aged bald guy standing on Crystal Beach in Galveston decades ago told me that once. And considering the swarm of women around him trying to get a better look at his peregrine falcon, I've never been able to disprove that statement. The types of bird used in every nation can differ, with falcons and hawks being the most common, but eagles preferred in Ethengar, and owls are used in Etrugan, though to a lesser degree. For hunting, they can bring down other birds and call their masters to locate them. They are also used to scout for large prey and draw the attention of the hunting party. If a bird spots a herd of wild pigs, it can be trained to circle and alert the hunters prey has been located. The largest raptors, specifically the Ethengarian eagles, have been known to support their masters in attacking animals as large as wolves. It's rare for a raptor to attack larger prey physically, but it's not out of the question with proper training. The rules for falconry in Mystara can be found in the Ethengar Gazetteer, though it's barely a paragraph for the single skill. Anyone should be able to take this skill. Falconry, as a sport in the real world, goes back for thousands of years. It's practiced in almost every nation in the world. It's not a cheap skill to learn either, because the cost of the bird starts at hundreds of gold pieces and goes up from there. A trained falcon costs 1,000 gold pieces per the equipment listed in the second edition book. More exotic birds or large birds like eagles or owls cost even more. Magical birds of prey would cost almost prohibitive amounts of money to train, assuming they don't electrocute you or worse in the process. Still, if you're in one of those campaigns where you have more money than you know what to do with, having 5 birds of prey on your arm is a great way to show off. The primary use for the giant varieties of birds is usually in combat, and if possible, mounts. This is quite difficult as birds that large aren't known for following orders. Few giant birds can carry much weight, even with their increased size, because extra weight keeps them from achieving flight. This can be done with things like magical saddles to reduce a rider's weight, or by using enormous giant birds like the Roc. The Rutibius air fleet allows giant birds in their ranks, but they must be able to carry a full-grown rider with gear. For this reason, the fleet prefers magical monsters over giant birds, as they're better suited for carrying passengers. The exception to this is the Roc, the fabled giant bird of lore. These creatures are rare in other settings, and many nations have only heard of them. In Yalarum, it's practically the national bird. Not to say they have a lot of rocks in their borders, but they do have more than their fair share. The creatures nest in the mountains of Nithia, but fly over Yalarum looking for prey, often camels or cattle. They have no special protections, other than the difficulty of bringing down a gigantic bird the size of an airliner, which you can imagine. Rocks can be trained to carry a rider, but trying to domesticate one is complex, and failure tends to get the trainer eaten. That's the birds of Mystara. I'm cleaning out the monster section to talk about every type of creature we have that I can justify, and this knocks another 7 off the list. Next week is my tribute to Monty Cook, as I'm looking at the spells in Mystara named after wizards. Greyhawk has Melf's acid arrows. We have Bargle's bouncing baby Brigadine. Okay, maybe not that last one. Still, it's time to look at the spells good enough to put your name on them. Until then, don't hoit the Boyd!